All right, everybody, welcome to episode 89 of the Fantasy Timeline, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network. I'm Josh at Real Fantasy TL. I'm with my main man, Bill at Super Duper Flex. Bill, how you doing, man?
Man, it's a duet today, huh? We don't have our special guest, so it looks like you and I are going to have to actually talk today. That's exciting, but doing well. How are you?
Doing good, man. We're going to kick it old school. Just the two of us.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, listen, I take requests. Don't you worry about it. But no, man, doing good too. Excited that we are in this thing. We are back. It is another Wednesday. It is another time to shine. And you know what? Let's just get into the news because I'm not gonna lie to you. Yesterday afternoon, I said, "Oh man," actually, I'm sorry, Monday afternoon. I said, "Oh man, there's not really a lot of news, out here. Maybe we'll find something. Maybe we won't. Who knows?" I was looking and I found this, and it is a quote from Tom Brady's personal trainer, life coach, diet guru, man of many names, Alex Guerrero, who said he expects the Buccaneers QB, Tom Brady, to play at least 2 more seasons, allowing him to fulfill his goal of playing in the NFL until the age of 45. So this actually, we'll talk about this a little bit, but I want to tie it in because I always reach out. I always ask for questions on Wednesday afternoon just to see if anybody's got anything. And this is from friend of the show, Jerry O'Shea at Jerry Shea FF. Is Brady going to play forever? And if so, what is his value in Superflex Dynasty? So, it's funny. I was telling you this story earlier. I'm in a league, a 16-team Superflex, traded for Tom Brady 2.5 seasons ago, and have been told by people in that league he's going to retire every year since I traded for him. 3 off seasons. And all he's done is play in Super Bowls, go to new teams, play in more Super Bowls, sign extensions. So is Tom Brady going to play forever, Jerry? I would love to say yes because my team won the championship in that league. But no, eventually Tom Brady will retire. I don't know if it's going to be when he's 45, 47, 50. Based on what he did the second half of last year, it doesn't look like he's slowing down. So, he could play past 45 possibly, unless that cliff comes at him quick. But for value in Superflex, I mean, I don't think his value has really changed in probably the last at least 2 seasons. You're kind of hesitant because you expect the cliff to come, but then the cliff doesn't come. And I'm thinking, it's at least a first round pick in Superflex Dynasty, which is the minimum that you have to pay for any starting quarterback, in my opinion, or almost any starting quarterback in Superflex Dynasty. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's everything. It's kind of stayed the same, like you said. I think his situation got better when we went to Tampa, but then of course there's more concern as to how long his career will be. So now we got another year further down the line. He is signed through next year. So I think that's about all your expectations can be. Maybe he does retire at the end of the year, just if there is some sort of physical ailment or his mind just shuts off or who knows, right? But for value, I think he's probably at a late first. That's kind of where it would be, because he's super hyped right now for this season. So it's okay, well, he didn't even figure it out till the end of the season last year. So now he's got a whole season with all of these weapons for 1 more year. People know what he wants a little bit more, so it just seems like that whole team's going to be a little more efficient. So I don't see many people willing to sell him for an early second Maybe if you get somebody who has a ton of quarterbacks and they want to get a little younger or something, you might be able to move some young players, for not quite a first value. But I think that overall it is probably going to be like 110 to 112 range. While we're talking, I'll actually go on the DLF Trade Finder and see like what the most recent ones have been.
I'll chit chat while you're doing that because I think you're dead on with value. I said a first round pick, and I don't want people to think that I mean like trade the 101 for Tom Brady because that's silly. But yeah, I think that that 109 to 112 range. If especially if you're a contender, this is kind of friend of the show Rocky Petrella's strategy of getting quarterbacks like, oh, you have a Tom Brady that you don't want? All right, let me send you a late first. And his teams are usually contending because he drafts, he has strength at pretty much all the other positions. So, he throws Brady in there for the stretch run and he gets himself to the playoffs or past that. Yeah, that's what I think about that. And if you want to even maybe, when you're talking to someone about a trade, they are super deep offensively. I mean, you talk about the big three receivers they have with Evans, Godwin, and Brown. But then, Scotty Miller was doing some things last year. People like Tyler Johnson. They drafted Jalen Darden, which a lot of people, including myself, liked in the draft process. Then you go to running back. They got Fournette. They got Rojo. They signed Gio Bernard. I mean, tight end. OJ Howard was good for those first 4 games until he got injured. Gronk catching 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl, so he can kind of have a 1-game explosion for you if you need it. I mean, they're just so even if they get hit with some injuries, they're still super deep, and there's still guys that Brady can throw to and hand the ball off to. So yeah, I mean.
So here's a few of the trades I found. The first one's from June 15th. Brady for a 22 second. Let's see, another one that was on the 25th of June, Brady for a 22 first and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay.
And then one that was last week, Brady for a 22 first. So it's right in that range. I would think so. Who knows where those teams that traded for him are, but I would imagine they're contenders,
right?
Which would make the most sense. So yeah, late first ish. And, your mileage may vary depending on your league, but you might have to add a sweetener or something, but it's not the worst trade you could make for this season, I don't think.
Yeah, and I mean, like the one trade you mentioned with the first and St. Brown, that sweetener is going to just be a little sprinkle of something. Somebody like say a late round rookie that you took, maybe you have to throw that in, or you have to throw in a third or fourth in 2022, or maybe even 2023 if you want to kick the can down the road. It's not going to be it's not going to be anything that breaks your back. So if you are a contender, and I mean really evaluate your team because this time of year everyone's a contender. Nobody's played games. We're thinking the best about everybody, but really evaluate your team and see if you're a legit contender, yeah, throw your first out there. I mean, Brady's going to only make your team better. So that first is going to be lower than probably you expect it to be right now. So,
I mean, the one negative is that you have to be willing to lose that completely, right? Like, because that's the one thing you're probably not going to find somebody else that's going to be willing to trade for him even next year. You might be able to get a second next year, but if you're between a rock and a hard place at QB, you could do way, way worse than adding him.
Yeah, and if Brady will be playing this year and next year, the minimum. I mean, if he gets you, if he wins you some money in one or both of those years, uh, it's an investment well spent. So, you know, as I said earlier, I was struggling to find news, and then yesterday, on all hell broke loose. Uh, Rams running back Cam Akers suffered a torn Achilles. That sucks, man. I mean, listen, I was on the maybe Cam Akers is a little bit overhyped train, but people were doing victory laps yesterday, and I don't understand it because here's my thing behind
This
it.
happens every year, doesn't it? Where people do that.
It happens every year, but an injury doesn't prove you right because we don't know what Cam Akers would have been without an injury. For all I know, I was dead wrong. Cam Akers was going to come out. He was going to ball. He was going to be a top 5 to 7 running back. And I would have looked foolish for saying, hey, I think we might be a little bit too high on Cam Akers. An injury doesn't prove me right. It just proved to me that, unfortunately, this player got injured. That's all that. I mean, I never walked out here predicting Cam Akers to get injured. So what would anyone be victory lapping?
I think it's more that just people are not happy that he got hurt per se, but that they bet against him, and maybe they're reaping the rewards of maybe having Darrell Henderson on their teams. And so, like, I think that it's like an indirect celebration and, in a tasteless way.
Yeah. And I mean, Achilles sucks. I mean, if you look at all of the fantasy Twitter doctors, and I'm not talking about the people that pretend they're doctors. I'm talking about the people that have actually gone to school and do this every day. Returning from Achilles is very hard. There's not a lot of success for it in the NFL. I posted in the FTC, the Fantasy Timeline chat. Remember, if you want to get in, just hit one of us up. You see our handles, or hit us up at Fantasy Timeline, and we'll let you in. But I posted a thread that Ethan Turner put out there, and it was really good. It kind of explains, because a lot of people are saying, well, with modern medicine, he should be fine. And he really dove deep into what modern medicine is when it concerns Achilles injury. And it's a good read. If you find it, Ethan Turner, just search him. You'll find the thread probably pretty easily. But, he's kind of almost going to be a test case in a way, because there haven't been too many running backs as dynamic as he showed, as young as he is, who have tried to come back from this injury. So it'll be interesting to see how he recovers. And, I hope everything goes well for him, just because, I might be lower than you or anyone else on a player. Doesn't mean, I want to see them hurt. I want to see everybody out there playing, to the best of their ability and leaving it all out on the field. So here's a good one from friend of the show, Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. Who plays a snap first, Deshaun Watson or Cam Akers? That's actually a legit good question. So I'll throw it to you first, Bill. Is it Watson or is it Akers?
Oh, I think it's Watson. I have a hard time believing at this point that he's going to get suspended for a season. I would think that we would have heard something by now, unless he sits out. But I think that at some point he'll either get traded or whatever. I don't know. So I would bet him. At worst case, in my opinion, at least from what I've seen in the past, it would be a tie. So, next year they'll probably be playing at the same time. So, I would go Watson for sure.
Yeah, and I'll make it 2 for 2. I agree with you. I think at some point this season, Deshaun Watson will be playing. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know where that's going to be. But I have a feeling that you know, and we see this all the time. The NFL usually likes to wait for the courts to do their thing before they institute whatever punishment they decide they're going to. Obviously, there have been a few cases where they haven't done that. First one that pops to mind is the Ezekiel Elliott situation, where there was really never any court thing, but the NFL instituted a penalty. But we've seen, for the most part, the NFL likes to sit back. They like to see what the courts decide and then kind of come in afterwards and dish out their punishment. So right now, I'm with you. I haven't heard anything about the civil case that's involved. So I have to imagine that at some point the Texans will realize that Deshaun Watson is not going to play for them. He does not want to play for them. And they will ship him out. I was almost going to say to the highest bidder, but it's the Texans, so maybe not. But they will ship him out. I know last week or a couple weeks ago, the hot rumor was him going to Philly. But who knows? I mean, at this point, anything can happen. We say the same thing about the Aaron Rodgers situation all the time. Anything can happen. So,
yeah, we've heard that with like 4 teams already for him. So, I mean, for Watson. So, I think it's just making the rounds, and it's that time of year where beat writers don't really know what to write about yet. So, they're like, "What ifs? Let's write about that."
Yep, and that's usually what gets the most clicks this time of year. So, so we knocked out the questions. Thank you, Jerry and Andrew, again for throwing those out there, because it actually tied in perfectly with our news. So we can move right on to what we do best, Bill. What we saw on the timeline. So this first one here is from David Zach at David Zach 16. Ja'Marr Chase's ADP of a top 22 wide receiver in redraft still feels way too high. Hasn't played in a live game in 20 months by season start, and is competing with established wide receivers and Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, both who average 6.5 plus targets per game. Going to be hard to pay off on cost. So, Scott Fishbowl season, we've been doing our little redraft thing. We probably will. I know I usually end up in 1 or 2 more redraft between work leagues and home leagues and stuff like that. So this is an interesting topic of conversation, since we are really moving into draft season. What do you think for redraft? Ja'Marr Chase, is top 22 too high?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's pretty much. Are you sure that these other guys have the ceiling that he has? Like, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like, yeah, he has some, potential roadblocks, but at the same time, I mean, this is a guy who was drafted very early in the draft. It's not like he is a 3rd round wide receiver coming out of Akron or something. You know what I mean? He was the most dominant wide receiver on the most dominant offense in NCAA history. So, I mean, that's pretty, a pretty big thing. So there's a lot of expectations. Is there some of it built in? Yes. But at the same time, I mean, tell me any player in that range that you feel you're certain he's going to outperform Chase, and he has even that much higher of a and has a higher ceiling than Chase. And I don't think that there are anybody in that range. Maybe you do bust on him, but I think at that point, I mean, you're out of the elite wide receivers, and then it's just a big puddle of sameness. So you got to differentiate somehow. And I'm going to go with the guy that I think has the potential to be in a high volume offense. Maybe it's not a good offense and it'll fall flat, but maybe they do throw the ball 40 plus times and he's getting 20% of the target. So 8 targets a game. That's 130 targets in the season. So, I mean, that's pretty. Then you're at Justin Jefferson level. So I don't think that that's an overly high ADP. Is it 22 for the wide receivers or 22 overall?
I think in his tweet, let me just pull it up again real quick. He says a top 22 wide receiver in redraft.
Yeah, I don't see. I think anything outside of the top 10 is reasonable. But I mean that I'm more wired for upside at that point. I want to take a risk on somebody that I think could be not just a position filler, but somebody that could make a difference.
Yeah, so I'm with you, Bill. I think that we're looking at let's go back in time. Let's go back to LSU. The reason why maybe people weren't as high on Justin Jefferson coming out as they should have been was because of Ja'Marr Chase. All right, that's kind of little check number 1 for Ja'Marr Chase. The time off is going to be a little bit concerning, but let's look at it. He hasn't been sitting around just eating chips and hanging out with his friends. He's been working out. He's now in an NFL organization, and I know it's the Bengals, so that can be declared debatable. But he's been working out. He's going to be in mini camps, training camp, preseason games. So he's going to have opportunities to knock the rust off. This isn't going to be he hasn't stepped onto a football field in 20 months, week 1, and good luck. He has a connection with Joe Burrow. I mean, that was his quarterback at LSU. Now, I'm not going to say that these are stories that, I've seen, but, stories that I did see, Joe Burrow was lobbying management to get Ja'Marr Chase over an offensive lineman. That could be smart. That could be dumb. You can make your decision on that. But this is a guy that Joe Burrow wanted on the team. So I'm sure they've been working out. They've been practicing. Joe Burrow has been, kind of talking over the playbook with, hey, here, I want you to do this. On this play, I want you to do that. I know where the safeties are going to be. I know where the corners are going to be. And they're kind of doing that mental preparation already. Plus, they have chemistry from LSU. So, and let's look at, everyone likes to bring up Justin Jefferson because he blew up last year. He had a rookie explosion. But let's downgrade it a little bit to a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who played most of the season with, Andy Dalton and a busted up offensive line. And he was still in that low end top 2, high end top 3 range. And we're talking about on a very beat up team that has a very bad defense. I mean, guess what? Cincinnati Bengals defense ain't nothing to write home about. So, we could see the same thing, but more if Joe Burrow plays 17 games. So I have no issue at wide receiver 22. In redraft, I don't know the other guys in that area code. But I don't see a problem with taking him in that area and saying, let's see if he can ball out. Let's see if he can, if he can be closer to wide receiver 12 than wide receiver 22.
Yeah, I just think that there's so many players that are smashed together, probably from wide receiver 12 to 40, that I don't really like the differentiation between those, or at least 36. Like wide receiver 2s and 3s are probably pretty interchangeable for the most part. It's just a matter of, do you want to take somebody who has more upside or more reliability? And, that's, I think that's just a personal preference, the risk tolerance, that sort of thing. But 22 for him seems pretty fair, if not almost a bargain in my mind. Like that's, Like I could easily see him going 16 and not flinching.
Well, and this is something you've been bringing up, and I you bring it up. You've been in the forefront, but I've always agreed with you on this. There are wide receivers everywhere. I mean, this isn't, we're not talking about tight end where there's three guys and a whole lot of maybes and probably nots. This isn't running back where things dry up quickly. I mean, wide receiver, we just, like you said, I mean, if Jamar Chase is 22, who's 32? We probably like that guy too. You know what I mean? Like we can probably see in the range of outcomes something good happening with wide receiver 32. I was listening to a podcast today where Emmanuel Sanders is being taken. And I believe this is in redraft, wide receiver 61. Like we could see a situation where Emmanuel Sanders is wide receiver 40, and you go, wide receiver 40, that sucks. Who cares? Well, that's depth on your bench. And
Yeah.
we're talking about a guy that you're getting in one of the last rounds in a redraft at wide receiver 61. That could be a flex option for you some weeks. You know what I mean? So there are guys everywhere. I mean,
yeah, I got Deshaun Jackson with the last pick of round 22 for Scott Fishbowl. It's like he's a guy that could still perform if he doesn't, for week one and then never again, which is his MO because he gets hurt. But like there's a lot of guys out there that are still, that you can pick and choose. I mean, those are guys you can't rely on, of course, but they're decent players that you can throw on your bench. And if they do show that they're getting the volume, they're a piece you can put in a flex. So yeah, there's just so many wide receivers. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you just said Deshaun Jackson in what you said, what's your last pick?
Yeah, it was the last pick. So what is that? 22 times 12.
Yeah, whatever.
164.
A million. I mean, I'm looking through my division Scott Fishbowl draft. Like, Alan Lazard went in the 21st round. Like, that was a guy that was putting up some weeks for you. Like, yeah. Let me just go through here. Amari Rodgers, who's kind of a rookie that, again, Green Bay, that we're kind of like, oh, maybe he could do a little something, 19th round. I took Denzel Mims in the 18th round. Like, they're just guys and you can create a well thought out narrative of like, hey, like Denzel Mims could be the number one on the Jets. Like, is Corey Davis really that good? We all love Elijah Moore for their draft pick this year, but he's a rook. We've never seen it happen. It's just like you said, they're everywhere. They're plentiful, and Jamar Chase could definitely wide receiver 22. He could definitely be wide receiver 13 or 14 or 15, and we wouldn't even be shocked about it. So that was a good one. I like talking to David here. David Zach at David Zach 16. I don't know if I said that earlier, but that's why we think he could pay off. And obviously, hey, if he's not your guy, let him slide past you at wide receiver 22. But if it was Bill and I think we would be scooping him up with a big smile on our face. This next one here is from B Waz at Twat Handle. You traded Dalvin Cook and the 209 for CeeDee Lamb, the 205, and a 2022 first. What do you think? I'll go first on this one because I will proclaim my CeeDee Lamb love. I said last year that I thought in 2 to 3 years he could be a top 3 wide receiver in the league. So we'll see what happens this year. Hopefully Dak can stay healthy the entire year, and we'll see what he looks like in this offense. But I like this deal. I mean, Dalvin Cook is obviously, he's a lot of people's running back too. I think in Dynasty and in redraft. So, I mean, you need to get some big time players if you're doing that. but I feel like you're getting a guy who has the potential, maybe next year being a top 3 wide receiver. You're getting a little bit of a bump in the second round of this year's rookie draft, and then you're getting a first next year. So I think that's a pretty good haul for a player that I think most people like in Dalvin Cook. Um, Bill, as someone who maybe is a little bit less biased than me, what do you think about this deal?
That's a trade I make every time. I feel like that's less than fair. I feel like it's just the right time to trade Dalvin. Like, next year everybody's gonna be freaking out about his age. What's your return then? We did say that there are a lot of wide receivers, but at the same time, you're getting a top 12 wide receiver and a first round pick. That's pretty monstrous in my opinion for a running back who's gonna start depreciating now. So and value at least. So I'm totally, and he's always getting nicked up. So that's the other issue. So like there's a lot of things. I think you're moving into safer assets and assets that are on the upswing, not the downswing.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you brought up the injury history, because you brought up his age, and next year he's a year older, and if people think we get scared about receivers as they get older, we get doubly scared about running backs as they get older. And if he's not only a year older, but he's coming off a shoulder injury or a knee injury or an ankle injury. I mean, it doesn't have to be serious. I'm not talking about, torn ACL or anything like that. We're going to be even more freaked out, because we're like, wait a minute, now he's a year older. Now he's coming off of this injury. We know he has an injury history. And like you said, what will his value be? It ain't going to be CeeDee Lamb a first and a little slight bump in the second. You might be lucky if you get that little slight bump in the second and a first. Forget CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb isn't coming to you anymore. So, yeah, I like the deal. When I looked at it, I was just like, wow, like good for you. I wish I could pull off some trades like that. Usually I don't get offered trades like that. But no, man, good for you. Love that deal for you, BWAS. So, give yourself a pat on the back. We're giving you a pat on the back because we agree. It's a good deal for you. So here's a good one. I think this is one we can talk about for a little bit. So this is from Justin Wright at Justin_14P. If Watson lands in Philly, then Dallas Goedert is a top 5 tight end. Devonta Smith is easily a top 24 wide receiver. And Miles Sanders is a top 15 running back. That's a lot. That's a big increase to all 3 of those guys. So, Bill, if Deshaun Watson gets traded to Philadelphia, obviously he's going to be starting. Can all of that stuff happen?
So we looked at let's compare the two teams, right? They both have questionable defenses, right? They both have questionable offensive lines. The strength, you would argue, is the wide receivers in Houston last year compared to Philly. The strength for Philly is the tight ends. Running backs also, probably. So then what happened last year? David Johnson was a top 12 running back, I think, or something like that, in a points per game. So, like, that's pretty – I mean, that could happen, I guess. Cooks and Fuller, points per game, did really well. Probably both top 24 guys, right? So, I mean, I think that that's possible for Devonta Smith. And then Goddard, if he's the other option, the only thing that I find might be an issue for Goddard, and that's probably the one that I'm most hesitant on, is that he, Watson's a guy who likes to launch the ball downfield, and he's kind of like, ad libs and that sort of thing, and he's always looking for the guy down the field. And is that going to be Dallas Goedert? And I don't think that's necessarily what his game. He's much more of your prototypical tight end. So that would be my biggest concern. I think the other two are very possible. I think the most exciting thing would just be that, Watson would be on the field. So, he's the. It's going to take a while for him to get used to the system too, right? So it's not something that would be immediate. Plus, you have. Are they going to want to plug in Jalen Hurts a little bit? What are they going to do? Or is he just sit on the bench? What's are they going to try to do some funky stuff with two quarterbacks? But yeah, I think Goddard would be the one that I'm most hesitant to say, yes, that will happen. Especially if they don't trade Ertz for whatever reason.
Yeah. So it's funny because you mentioned Jalen Hurts. And the first thought in my mind was, well, Jalen Hurts won't be there because if I was the Texans, Jalen Hurts would be part of the package. But then I was like, well, wait a minute. That's rational thinking, and that doesn't always line up with the Houston Texans. So Jalen Hurts could still be in Philadelphia. So,
but you're right; it's less likely. Yeah, now that you say that,
But I sometimes try to apply rational thinking to the Texans, and then I have to remember that they are the Texans, and that applying rational thinking may not be what I should do. But I actually feel like he undersold Devonta Smith with Watson there, and he may have oversold the other two. I think if Deshaun Watson is there, Devonta Smith could be top 15-ish. And I just think that he is going to use him kind of like he used Brandon Cooks and have him be that number one guy, even though he doesn't look like he should be able to do all the number one guy type things. Goddard, I think, is talented, but man, I mean, if you look at tight end 5, you have the big 3, barring injuries. A lot of us, including I think the 2 of us, love T.J. Hockenson. Mark Andrews is a guy that we may slam what he did last year, but he was still top 5, top 6. We got 5 guys right there, and then if you start bringing in, people's love childs your Adam Troutmans and your Robert Tonyans and your those type of guys. I think top 5 might be a little rich. I think he's talented. I do, but I would see it being hard for him to do that, to be top 5 with those 5 guys there. And then you're talking about Miles Sanders. Man, I don't know what that run offense is going to look like because what we saw in Indianapolis, with Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor, and we see kind of they like to use not a bunch of different guys, but at least 2 or 3 different guys. Could Miles Sanders be top 15 in a rotation if other guys are being involved? Kenny Gainwell was drafted there. I think they got Jordan Howard back. So I know there's a couple other guys there. So I think those 2 may have been oversold a little bit, and I think actually Smith may have been undersold a little bit. But I mean, listen, I'm a Cowboys fan, but Deshaun Watson in the NFC East, that would just be fun. It would be fun to see him, airing it out, to, and can he make Jalen Reagor a thing? Jalen Reagor was kind of that deep threat guy. I was never high on him, but I mean, Deshaun Watson could definitely do it. So that was fun. That was one that I knew we could discuss a little bit on, and I wasn't sure if we were going to feel the same way about it, but I feel like we may have differed a little bit, but I don't think we differed too far to where we could get into argumentative banter, because now obviously, Bill says you trade Trey Sermon to the Eagles and then watch out, then it really takes the top off the old offense there. But here's a good one here from our man, the Dynasty Trades guy at Dynasty Trader 2. Which QB would you rather in Dynasty? Josh Allen or Kyler Murray? This is a good one because this is two guys that we all love. I know third host of the timeline, Drew, big Bills fan. So obviously, he's on the.
Thanks, Drew. Appreciate you.
Yeah, he's going to be on that Josh Allen train. But
Bills fans, not a Bill fan.
No, not a Bill fan. You got plenty of those. I mean, I know you have to shut down the DM sometimes because of all the fans, but a Buffalo Bills fan. So we'll go from the Buffalo Bills to the fantasy timeline Bill. Who do you have? Who do you like more in Dynasty, the long-term view? Is it Josh Allen or is it Kyler Murray?
I mean, I think long term, I think I have to go with Josh Allen just because of his build, his, I think there's always the potential of Kyler deciding to go play baseball at some point. It's not a huge threat, but it's always still something like in the back of your mind that he may, and plus just his size, that's something that's always going to be like, man, is he going to get just lit and injured? Is he going to be able to truly make all the throws, because of his height? There's always going to be those questions. So when I get an elite, quote unquote, elite quarterback, I want somebody that I feel comfortable with just plugging in and knowing that I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff usually. Granted, there is a little, I think you're giving up a little upside by going Josh Allen. But I would prefer the safety of him a little bit more.
Yeah, I was hoping that you would say Kyler so we could argue a little bit. But I think I like Josh Allen, by a little bit. And here's the thing. I think Kyler is a top 5 to 7-ish quarterback, and the guys in that territory, I think, are separated by very little. I mean, you kind of have Mahomes, who is on his own little planet, but then you have, your Josh Allen, your Kyler Murrays, your Dak Prescott's, and I think all those guys, Lamar Jackson, I think all those guys are separated by very little, so you can make easier arguments for any of those guys. But yeah, I go Josh Allen here. I like,
and it looks like 2/3 of the people did as well.
Yeah, it was about 65-35 in favor of Josh Allen. I like they both have an elite number one option. You have Diggs in Buffalo. You have D-Hop in Arizona. And then I think the secondary weapons might be a little bit better in Buffalo. I mean, you have Emmanuel Sanders. You maybe have Cole Beasley. That's the whole issue in and of itself. I like the coaching staff better in Buffalo.
Yeah.
So I give it a slight edge in those departments, But I mean, listen, you can argue Kyler Murray, the rushing upside, and I know Josh Allen has it as well,
but not to the same level.
but not to the same level. I could be wrong about the secondary weapons. What if, Rondell Moore is that dude that we thought he was a couple years ago, and he comes out and he flashes? What if, AJ Green actually has a quarterback that can throw him accurate passes? That could be a little 1 year explosion from AJ Green. The run, I would say the running game is better in Arizona, which is a weird thing to say when you're talking about Chase Edmonds and James Conner, but I think, they might have a slight advantage over Moss and Singletary. So, I mean, you can make the argument both ways, but I think dynasty drafts have been showing us that Josh Allen is, at least in ADP, is being taken higher than Kyler Murray. So it's not like I'm coming up with crazy thoughts and ideas, but anything else that you can think about on this subject?
I mean, the defense. I mean, the Bills have a much better defense, so that would be my one concern, is that it might be a little more limiting for fantasy. But I just prefer this. I think the more long-term safety. But other than that, no, I think we covered it.
I think we did too, and we blew through these questions today. Usually we talk and have banter, but I guess we're just down to business today.
Well, we usually have a third voice talking as well, so that probably adds 25 minutes or 20 minutes.
It probably does. But you know what? Since we have a little bit of extra time, I wanna circle back to the Cam Akers thing, because we kind of talked about Cam Akers and all that, but I'll be the timeline here, and I'll ask the question: what do you think, if you're a Cam Akers owner, what would you realistically take in a trade for Cam Akers? And you could talk about draft picks, you could talk about players if you want. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. But if I don't have Akers anywhere, I don't know if you do.
I have him in one league out of 20.
Okay, so combined, we have very little exposure to Cam Akers. But if you have him, what would you have him in one league? What would you take for him?
I mean, I'm not selling a second. I'm not taking a second. That would just be a waste of my time.
Right.
Honestly, I'd rather just hold and hope. You still, regardless if you trade him or you don't, it's still the same amount of roster spots he's taken up this year. You can throw him on the IR, you can just let him sit, see what happens next year. So Husker said 22 first, and I think that's exactly where I have to be. That's kind of the value I would need to get. Otherwise, I would just hold and hope that he comes back. And there will be people, even if he doesn't get back to who he is, I would consider, if I can't get that now, I'm going to make a move next, training camp, so that I can get the value then, because I'm not, as much as Ethan was talking about, that there is a road, a path to recovery. There's still percentages you have to play, and the burst that these players lack after blowing out their Achilles, we've seen that. And I mean, there's not one running back that we can point to that says he successfully came back and had the same burst he did pre. So that, and power, right? That's the other thing. So it's I would still be trying to move him before the season starts, but I would make sure, if I don't get what I want now, I'm going to wait till next camp, get what I can then, which isn't going to be much less than what I could now, right? So I'm willing to roll the dice then. Yeah.
And here's an interesting one. I think I know your answer, Bill, but I'll shoot it to you. Henderson for Akers.
I mean, that's an interesting one because, like, if you do need a running back, I mean, you're still. It's not like Henderson did terribly when he was getting the opportunity last year.
On averages, they were kind of the same guy, Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson.
And Henderson was doing that against defenses that weren't as tired.
Right.
You know, like, so, like, that's a kind of trade that I would definitely consider if I need a running back. If I feel like at least then I get this year to maybe sell him if I want to. If I'm not sold on Henderson, I still think he's going to be the guy that gets most of the touches regardless of who they sign at this point. You know, like, I think that he'll be the guy that's the most dynamic, the guy that, you know, he maybe not the most touches, but he's going to be the most efficient, and he's going to be the guy that, you know, is probably the fantasy relevant running back on that team. So that would definitely be something I would consider, because, like, in our FTC, we were talking about, like, what would it take for you to sell Henderson? I mean, I'm not selling him for a second. Nope. So, like, would you do it for 2 seconds? I mean, that's kind of like right at the cusp of what I would be like maybe willing to sell him if I don't need him, and it's just like, okay, I don't really believe in him long term. Get 2 seconds for him, call it a day. Like, I mean, that's kind of right in that, you know, that Akers value. So, like, I don't see. I think that that's a trade that's definitely worth considering if you are in that situation.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the Rams schedule just because I kind of want to see, like, is there, you know, where might be the window to sell them? Man, they start off with some defenses. You know, their first 3 are Bears, Colts, Bucks. Yikes, that's kind of a murderer's row, and it doesn't get better. I mean, you know, they play, yeah. I mean, they have a stretch in October and November where they go kind of Lions, Texans, Titans.
Did you say, what was it? Bills, Colts, Bucks?
Bears, Colts, Bucks.
Or Bears. I mean, the Bears aren't that, like, daunting in my opinion. So
I don't know, man. I still think they're pretty good. They may not be an elite defense, but I don't think they're a defense that you rub your hands and go, okay, my guy can go off today. Now,
yeah, it's not the easiest start, but you keep in mind that, you know, they got a new quarterback, they got a lot of things going for them. They have a good defense. So there's you know, the matchup between the Bears and the Rams is pretty tasty, in my opinion, for the Rams as a whole. So, I mean, the Colts, who knows with Wentz, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of things like that could just either fall great for them or be rough. You're right. Like, it's not, but I don't think it's anything I'm like totally thinking, oh, this is terrible matchups.
Well, I'm looking at the defenses, and I'm going, you know.
But game script is important.
The game script
for the running back,
you know, is important, but you know, forget what Twitter will be like if Darrell Henderson against the Bears or the Colts has, you know, 20 carries for 75 yards. You know, we'll all be losing our minds about why, you know, why didn't we trade Darrell Henderson in July when we had the chance? You know,
I'd be stoked for 20 carries. You kidding me?
I mean.
But yeah, everybody's going to freak out about everything because that's what Twitter does.
I mean, I know we're hyping up Xavier Jones and Jake Funk, and who knows, maybe one of those guys turns into something. But right now, it's Darrell Henderson and a whole lot of nada, in my opinion. Listen, week 1 of the season, maybe one of those 2 guys blows up during the preseason games and they look like legit contenders. But right now, I don't see a player on that roster, and I honestly don't see any players that are available for through free agency, excuse me, that really get signed that you go, oh man, Darrell Henderson has just lost a ton of value. I mean, I've heard, what about a Todd Gurley reunion? What about a Lev Bell coming over? What about Frank Gore? I mean, but we saw those guys last year, and they all had their heyday.
Oh, Peterson was another one. So it's all
Peterson,
yeah.
Those guys all had, and honestly, Peterson, as crazy as this might sound, might be the guy that takes away the most value. But you're not panic selling Henderson if Adrian Peterson signs tomorrow. You're
Right.
not like, crap, let me get what I can get now because Adrian Peterson is on the team. And barring a massive blockbuster deal, I don't see a lot of guys. People have said, what about Melvin Gordon? I mean, if the Rams can pull off that trade, yeah, Melvin Gordon is a guy that I'd be like, all right, he takes some serious value away from Darrell Henderson. But I mean, you're talking about a team that's devoid of draft picks and it is close to the cap. I don't see that as a trade they make.
Yeah, it'd have to be something where, like, basically the team they'd have to trade for somebody, or somebody would have to cut a player so they could sign him for league minimum, and that's about the only option they have. So, it's going to be tough for them, and maybe they just become more of a passing offense now, and that's another thing, but that's not a bad thing for Henderson. So, like, I mean, the whole situation is a positive for him. Now, mind you, he may go do terribly, and that could be, but he's shown enough to me in the last 2 years that he's capable. Like, is he going to be like, the most dynamic and, is he going to be a RB6 or something? Doubtful, but can he be a decent RB2 for you? Yeah, I think so.
And he ain't gonna be running up against stacked boxes. I mean, you got Stafford back there, you got Woods and Kupp. You mentioned, Deshaun Jackson. You still got Van Jefferson. They drafted Tutu Atwell in the second. People are still trying to get back on the Higbee train. So there are some guys there that you can't stack the box. You can't just be like, well, we're going to put 9 in the box versus Darrell Henderson and let Matt Stafford beat us, because he will definitely beat you if that's the plan of attack you take. But all right, so I want to flip it now. You want to acquire Cam Akers. What are you trying to give up? And I saw you nod your head. You ain't trying to acquire him.
I'm really not. Like, I mean, that's a tough one, just because I have no hope for him to be anything like he was pre-injury. It's just unfortunate, but that's kind of how these injuries, until you show me, like, people are going to be willing to take risks on these guys, and sooner or later it's going to pay off, right? Because medicine's going to get that much better, and they're going to be able to salvage the situation for that particular player. But I mean, you just got to think of, like, how much are you really gaining if they end up coming back to who they were, right? Like, so what was he worth? Maybe a mid first during the rookie draft, maybe.
Yeah.
So, like, let's say 104, 105 range. So, like, okay, if you give up a second for him, what do? You gain like a round in value. But how many times could you be making that risk with different running backs with that injury, and then you end up with a net negative, even if he hits?
Right.
Maybe if this is the first trade you ever make for a player with an injury like this in the same situation and he hits, hey, great, it's a profit. But I can't bank on that. So I'd rather let it happen once before it's just not worth the risk to me, like, for the benefit. To the fact that I'm not even sold on him pre-injury, because everything he did was at the end of the season. So I always have a hard time buying in because it's just a whole different situation when you have a fresh back coming in against tired defenses at the end of the season, and not every defense is still playing hard. So, like, we've seen it year in year out where these guys at the end of the season end up busting the following year, and it's very rarely is it where they carry it on to the next. Damian Williams, Kenyon Drake. It's like these same types of guys. I mean, granted, he's younger and everything, so I mean, there is a little bit of a different hope and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I'm just not really willing to. Like, would I give a second for him in the right league? Probably. If I'm a middle to late pick, I would be willing to do that, but I wouldn't expect anybody to accept that trade offer.
Yeah, and I'm with you. It's funny, we play the game so similarly and so differently at the same time. But I'm with you on the Cam Akers thing. It's just like reading everything that's out there by like actual, like I said, by actual doctors, not by people who, pretend to have a medical degree. While the likelihood of him coming back and playing is high, the likelihood of him coming back and being the player that he was is low. And at that point, what do I, if I trade the second, like you said in your scenario, I'm probably not getting first round Cam Akers. Probably getting a guy who's worth a second round. So really, I didn't cash in on some big profit. I just kind of broke even. And at that point, what I'll save the second and try to cash in on, maybe a young guy who didn't get a bunch of playing time, or an older vet to put me over the top. Like, I would rather use my second in that scenario than in a scenario where my most likely outcome is that I break even. So
the only way I do it is if I'm really hard up at running back, and it's just like, okay, if I can break even, fine, but at least I have a running back next year.
Right.
Like, that's the only time I make that decision. It's not like, trying to, buy a scratch off and hope it hits. It's more of like,
right.
All right, I'm spending $5 so I can get $8 next year.
Right. Yeah, and that's that's a good point. And honestly, probably the best time to pull off a deal is like right around mid-season, where like we're not talking about Cam Akers anymore because he's not on the field. So it's what we do. We're not talking about him. Out of sight, out of mind. He's on someone's roster. Maybe that team is doing well. And you go, hey, this Cam Akers isn't going to help you, but I have this.
Here's Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, like, here you go. Or like, kind of like what Wayne Gallman did last year for the Giants after Saquon got hurt. Like, hey, Here's this guy who's not really good, but he's getting all the carries because everybody else is injured. Like, you need some help in the playoff push. Here's a guy,
Yeah.
And that's really, I think trying to sell him now is not a good exercise because, we're on Twitter. We see all the Twitter docs coming out and kind of putting their 2 cents on it and, kind of putting their experience in the forefront and projecting, the range of outcomes for what could happen in this situation. But in October, Twitter docs are going to be talking about whoever got injured last week and what their range of outcomes. No one's going to be talking about them. And that's kind of, if you want them, I think that's the time to strike. Obviously, you risk it. Someone could swipe in, beforehand and make that trade. But I'm not trying to pay, the hope tax on Cam Akers and, finding out that Cam Akers isn't worth a first anymore. He's worth a second because he's lost some of that explosiveness. He's lost some of that bounce because of the injury. So, I mean, I'm with you, man. I'm not trying to trade for him. I received a trade offer for Cam Akers, and honestly, I rejected it. And my response in MFL was running backs with Achilles injuries, you know, the odds aren't that good. And that's what I put because, I mean, maybe I'm not, you know, enough of a gambler to play, you know, the dynasty game. But I don't, you know, I'd rather make you know, I'd rather put a gamble on, you know, a rookie. You know, we were joking about this earlier before the pod started. You know, I was talking about Thad Moss last year, and when he was in Washington, now he's in Cincinnati. You know, saying, hey, they don't have any real tight ends. Like, why not Thad Moss? You know, with a late round pick, and though, you know, I guess those are the gambles I'm trying to make. The gambles where it's like, if you lose, you didn't really lose anything, but if you win, you can really cash in. I feel Cam Akers is almost the opposite. Like, if you win, you're not really winning much, but if you lose, you're probably losing a lot. So, you know, I guess it's just risk tolerance. So that was a good little way to end the show with a little Cam Akers discussion, what we want to do, what we don't want to do with him. And, you know, what I want to do right now is thank everybody that was in the chat because we had some good discussion there. Steve was hitting us up with some trade scenarios. Husker was telling us, hey, you know, Bill loves his yay Bill from Steve. Husker DKB was hitting us with some ideas what he would want for Akers, who he would trade for Akers. When the chat is lit, it just makes the show so much better. We get to feed off of you guys. So remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, even if you're watching this later on, you ain't watching live. Remember to hit the bell, subscribe, because not only do you get us, but if that's not exciting enough, the junkies, man, the dynasty junkies, man, they've been doing more live stuff. If you were hitting that bell, you would have gotten the little alert last week when Rocky had James Roday from Psych, A Million Little Things on. That was a good one. So if you're watching this and you haven't watched that yet, we're going to wrap up in about a minute. Go over there and watch that because, man, that was so much fun. I was watching it at work, which I don't normally do. And then I had to stop watching because we had a lot of work come in and I had to stay focused. But I ended up finishing it up later on. They're awesome. The Trade Addicts go live sometimes on that as well. So not only are you getting us, you're getting the junkies, you're getting the addicts sometimes. So do that. And if you're listening to us on podcast, thank you guys too, because an hour and 7 minutes, you could literally be doing anything else. But you have listened to us and our thoughts and feelings and my general shenanigans. And just remember, too, for some reason you haven't hit subscribe on that yet, hit subscribe. Leave a rate and review as well because it helps us get out in front of people so that more people can listen to us. And maybe we can help at least one person this year do something well on their fantasy football teams. So on that note, Bill, we are getting out of here.